Disgraced former Spanish football president Luis Rubiales has officially been banned from all football-related activities for the next 3 years after he forcibly kissed Jennifer Hermoso at the Women's World Cup. But FIFA's decision to ban him is just the tip of a very complicated iceberg when it comes to the treatment of women in Spanish football.
And nothing can go wrong. Oh no, it all went wrong!
The 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup, by all accounts, was the absolute pinnacle of women's football. It well and truly put the women's game on the map and forced the world to take notice. So naturally, when the president of the Spanish Football Federation forcibly kissed a player during the trophy presentation, all eyes in the sold-out stadium and across the world were on him. But while it may have all come to a head on that fateful night in Sydney on August 20, 2023, this situation was boiling under the surface for decades. The issues facing women's football in Spain are deep-rooted and date right back to the 80s. Despite records of women playing football in Spain dating right back to the turn of the 20th century, it wasn't until 1980 that the Spanish Federation actually recognized the women's game. And it wasn't until 3 years after that, in 1983, that the first Spanish women's national team was officially formed. And while it may seem like the country has come leaps and bounds from not even recognizing women's football in the late 1970s to winning a World Cup in 2023, it's not quite that simple. In an opinion piece published at the height of the Rubiales controversy, former Spain captain and vocal critic of the Spanish Federation, Veronica B explains. The situation in Spain with Luis Rubiales is hard to explain to an international audience because this is something historical and cultural in our country. In the 1970s, women couldn't play sport, and that was the mentality we had in this country. From then until now, has a lot changed? Yes, but not as much as it should have because there are still lots of people who have a sexist mindset. This is a long and complicated story, so we're going to split it in two parts. In part one, we will deep dive into everything that led up to Rubiales becoming the president of the Spanish Football Federation, and then in part two, we'll unpack where it all went wrong. In 1988, Ignacio Carrera took over as the manager of the Spanish women's football team, a position that he held until 2015, making him one of the longest-serving managers in football history. During this time, he also concurrently managed the under-19s team from 2002 to 2008. But it all started to go wrong in 2011. In May 2011, Laura Del Rio, who boasts a massive 40 goals in just 39 caps for the national team, announced that she would never play for the national team again as long as Carrera was in charge. She claims that he called her a liar and an insult to the national team, alleging that she only wanted to play the important games and didn't want to play friendlies. When she spoke out in a public letter detailing her experience, she was never called up to the national team again. In an interview with Equalizer Soccer, she said, "I'm not the only one who is no longer part of the team due to this. There are many," referencing her not seeing eye to eye with Carrera. She did note that she would return to the team if he left. So even way back in 2011, more than a decade before the situation that we saw unfold this year at the World Cup, there was clearly a mentality in Spanish football that if you spoke out, you were risking being blacklisted from the national team. And this was way back in 2011, way before Jorge Vilda and Luis Rubiales assumed their positions. Which goes to show that the issues that women in Spanish football are facing are far bigger than any one individual. The trend of players being threatened or blacklisted from national team duties if they spoke out against the federation is something that becomes a common theme throughout this story. But Laura Del Rio is the first example I could find of this in my research. If we progress forward to 2015, Spain have finally qualified for their first Women's World Cup. It is beyond me how Carrera managed to stay in the top job despite not qualifying for a Women's World Cup in 27 years, but here we are. Captained by Veronica B, Spain finished bottom of their group and were eliminated after losing 2-1 to South Korea in the group stage. Much like their situation now, at the time Spain had good players. They had succeeded at lower levels. There was no reason that they couldn't have done at least semi-well at a World Cup. There were already rumblings back in 2011 of a general sense of dissatisfaction with the Spanish Football Federation and their indifference to women's football. But it was 2015 and this poor World Cup result that was really the straw that broke the camel's back. The entire 23-player squad issued a statement calling for a new coach and more tournament prep, while broadly just calling for a new era of women's football in Spain. This would not happen. This was a unanimous statement from the entire team, but it was only the senior players, including captain Veronica B, who were punished for this. Boquete and a number of other players were effectively blacklisted after this and never played for the national team again. A month after the statement was released, the Spanish Football Federation finally sacked the coach and replaced him with none other than Jorge Vilda. In the explosive 2021 documentary Break the Silence, it was revealed that the players did actually try to speak to the Federation about Carrera's sacking before they went public, but then President Villa allegedly ignored their calls for help and enabled Carrera. Sound familiar? According to the players who spoke out in the documentary, they believe the only reason that action was ever taken to sack him was because of the mounting public pressure at the time. In the documentary, it was alleged that Carrera was psychologically abusive, vocally homophobic, and created a toxic playing environment. Interestingly, one of the allegations presented in this documentary is that Carrera would not allow them to lock their doors until he had personally checked that everyone was in their room, and then he closed them for them. This is interesting because Jorge Vilda had a similar policy in place right up until 2019. According to Vicky Losada, people were scared in chats with him. They didn't speak, people didn't want to run into him in the hall or in the cafeteria. She also said, homosexuality was something Carrera wanted to eradicate. I had fear, but I gained confidence over time, and today I am public about it. Jumping back to 2017, sorry for the mess around, I had to give the context of what was in the documentary, which didn't come out till 2021, but we're back in 2017 now, bear with me. On July 18, 2017, then President Villa was detained by Spanish police on allegations of collusion, embezzlement, and falsifying documents. Because let's be real, football and corruption go together like ham and cheese. Following his arrest, he was suspended from his position as president, but this is interesting because while he resigned from his vice president positions at UEFA and FIFA, he desperately tried to keep his position at the Spanish Federation. There was an interim president for a while, but in May 2018, Luis Rubiales was officially elected as the president of the Spanish Football Federation. Throughout his time as president, Rubiales was denounced for many things, including but not limited to allegedly collecting aid to build his own house, hiring a model as a secretary, and recording conversations with politicians, just to name a few things. And I just want to note, by the time Jorge Vilda and Luis Rubiales assumed their positions, I could not find any evidence of the Spanish Football Federation condemning the things that Villa and Carrera did. Not a statement, not a note, nothing. I'm not saying these things don't exist. I'm just saying in my extensive research, I couldn't find any evidence of it. So by the time we've had all these new people come in, it is worth noting that nobody has condemned the people that have been accused of some pretty heinous things. And again, I must remind you, at this time, when Rubiales and Jorge Vilda entered the picture, there had already been multiple calls for a new era of Spanish women's football. And that's where we're going to wrap things on part one. At this point, Jorge Vilda and Luis Rubiales had both entered the picture. In part two, which will drop in a few days, we will document both of these men's tragic demise.